We are in an uptrend, but this is a different uptrend than all the cycles before, because there are more and more people who are going to hold this for long term instead of just trading it.
This cycle is completely different because of institutions also.
Yeah.
We never had such a big portion of high net worth individuals, big institutions, and maybe even countries coming in this cycle. And they have 100% a different buying power and also a different buying behavior.
I do believe that it's inevitable that more and more people will use it because it's permissionless. I'm curious which central banks are going to go in that direction. They have their own Czech krona, which they want to protect, of course, for the future. And this central bank governor there are aiming for 5% of their total balance to go onto Bitcoin. There's so much debt around that Bitcoin might be a solution for a transition. Every fiat currency has collapsed throughout history, so it will collapse at some point.
Hi, Bert, how are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
Yeah, perfect. Yes, it's more busy than last year, so that's very positive. Yeah.
You're seeing more demand for what you're doing in Bitcoin because of the higher price, or like how's it going with what you're doing?
Yeah. I don't think it's just higher price. Actually, that's an interesting question because it's also that mainstream media and that we see a different approach to Bitcoin from like the generic public. I think that more people are starting to investigate it. So what is the easiest for me to see is that it's in the book sales. So we do the Dutch translations of the famous Bitcoin books like the Bitcoin Standard. And that has a major uptick since like the end of last year. And you see that there's like hundreds and hundreds of these Dutch translated books flying out of the door. And that means that a lot of people are taking the time to learn about Bitcoin, study Bitcoin. And that's super positive. That's something that is also new for me. So
yeah, I think the price is kind of the one metric everyone can look at to see where everything else is going. Because obviously, if more books are sold, more education is done, more adoption is coming, more companies are coming, more minings are onboarded. Like if everything is going up, the price will either lead or lag that. Like I don't know, like what's leading and lagging, but the price is then kind of the obvious thing that is kind of a consequence of that because more people are buying in and more people are engaged in that. So it's hard to. What would you say is the best metric to capture the growth of the adoption of Bitcoin?
Yeah, for me personally, then it's really like to see this with books and etc. So studying, but I'm also the chairman of the United Bitcoin Companies, and we see a little bit of volume, let's say, with Dutch exchanges. So the volume is also increasing a lot, and that means that a lot of people are trading in out. And in general, this is during these very rapid movements of Bitcoin. And we've had that, for instance, in the beginning of last year also, where we got a run up, and then you see a lot of volume coming through the exchanges, and that has, of course, also happened around the inauguration. So if you look, and then you're saying lacking or front running, I think in general, like for me personally, when I started to really dive into Bitcoin, when I really became like a maximalist or really believed in Bitcoin was like after quite a long time of studying. So if you look at the books I read, it's not like directly after the book. It's like I've read a couple of books and then I took more time to investigate it. And I would expect that that is the road for many people. So if I see that there's now a lot of book sales, I'm expecting like at the end of this year that more and more people start to understand that this is some critical thing that is not going away. And that might also then, come back in the volume that we will see then maybe at the end of this year, let's say. So I think we are in an uptrend, but this is a different uptrend than all the cycles before, I believe, because there are more and more people who are going to hold this for long term instead of just trading it.
There are many interesting things there. Like, first of all, I think this cycle is completely different because of institutions also. I think we never had such a big portion of high net worth individuals, big institutions and maybe even countries coming in this cycle, and they have 100% a different buying power and also a different buying behavior. When you see MicroStrategy, they're just buying. Like they don't care if the price is dipping or not. They're just buying regardless. Someone that just comes in and is the first time there and they're just still educating like the retail money, he might get shocked off by a big swing. They might sell a little bit. If it's going too high, maybe they're actually also selling something. If Bitcoin is going too high for MicroStrategy, they're just issuing more bonds. They're just buying more Bitcoin and using the additional buying power. So like it's a whole different game, I feel like, since like 1-2 years, since the ETFs and the big institutions coming in. Like it will be really fun to see what's happens the next few years.
Yeah, and then if you look at I think it was the Fed speech yesterday or something that was specifically about cryptocurrency, and that we should like not like debank these companies. We need this innovation, and like a totally different stance in comparison with what we saw last year. And I don't know if you haven't seen it yet. If I
haven't seen the
So
speech yet.
Powell's speech yesterday was in that sense super interesting. And if we look at what happened also in the Netherlands, is that there was, of course, this Operation Choke Point, which rippled through the entire Western world. So it was not just the US, it was also the Netherlands, but it was also the UK. And if you then look at how many attempts there were to unbank exchanges to really make it difficult, that was really, really, really bad. And this was last year, right? So, and now with all of a sudden this political change, and then Mr. Powell saying something like, which is basically the opposite of what we experienced last year. That's like, wow. And banks are going to be able to also do something with this. So that means that they are going to be able to offer crypto services in Europe or in the Netherlands. It was at the moment, I think, only Revolut, which was really doing this. So yeah, now the question is which banks are not going to do this because they will be left behind, right? Because all the young people are exposed in some kind of way. And if I look internationally, I think it's super interesting that also these larger banks, you can just put a little bit of Bitcoin there, take a little loan out against your Bitcoin already. So it's such a different approach from what we've seen in the past. But still, these products, I think they are super risky. So most of the banks or most of the companies that have tried to do this in the past, they have failed. And then, everything is gone. So your Bitcoin is gone too. And we see now with segregation of funds regulation also that I think there's a much better possibility that these options are going to be there. But still, the best thing is, of course, not your keys, not your coins. And I expect that also to keep on growing. And that's something that we see also.
100%. But it's just great to have the opportunity. Like if you actually want to borrow against the Bitcoin, and you can and I think that will be true at some point. I mean, there are some solutions that have that, but where you can just prove that an address belongs to you, just like you sign just a message with that address to prove that you actually hold the keys to those Bitcoins, and then you can borrow against the Bitcoins, but always keep them in your possession, maybe at a higher rate or whatever.
But I wouldn't see how that is going to work, because that if you say it in that sense, then it's going to be that you could do this with multiple institutions and then borrow against it multiple times. That's like you either put it in the possession of someone else and you can borrow against it, or you have full ownership yourself. I don't really see anything going to be in between easily, let's say. So of course then they say, but if you move it or whatever, but it's very difficult to see if there are other loans outstanding on a certain address which you have the key signatures for. I would expect them to want to be able to hold the keys themselves. So in that sense, I would be afraid to take loans at companies that don't really have the keys themselves, because then they don't have ownership of the Bitcoin where they're loaning against. So that would be super risky. So this is an interesting discussion anyway. But
I just say that because I know banks in Austria actually do that currently. They do the same thing, basically what you can do with houses, and they see Bitcoin as a commodity. It might be very stupid, but as long as you can prove that you have the Bitcoin, you can take a loan out against the Bitcoin, because they're still in the fiat system. They're still, maybe they don't get Bitcoin to the extent of like you can do that with multiple institutions. You can do it online and something like that, because we have a credit institution in Austria that overlooks exactly that problem that is there for like 150, 160 years or something like that. It's probably there in every country. I know in Germany there are also things like that, where you can go to a bank, get a loan, and you can also go to other banks and get a loan for basically nothing. You don't have to show anything, just like a pay slip, and you get a loan. But there's an institute above that. In Austria, it's called KSV. There are also in Germany, probably Netherlands, many other ones. And America is probably just a big credit rating organization that kind of prevents that, and maybe they are they're feeling too secure in that system that worked in the fiat world, but doesn't work in Bitcoin, because it's a first asset that you cannot get out of someone's hand. Like if you have the same thing with a house, they can come up with the police and say like, oh, like, give us your house, or you go to jail.
I think these kind of things are extremely risky from this loaner perspective. If that's possible, as you say, then you take out the maximum loan. Let's say you put in a lot of Bitcoin, then you take out the maximum loan. You buy more Bitcoin for it. You take the plane to El Salvador, and good luck. You never pay anything back. That's like, okay. I would, if I would be the one that's loaning these people money just on proof of signature, it would be rather crazy in my opinion. But interesting.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I just wanted to show that because I didn't see what Jerome actually said.
Yeah.
And I just noticed today in the morning that Bitcoin went up a little bit, but it doesn't. It's usually not related to news. But today it was actually like he said, our role with Bitcoin really is to look at banks, and we think banks are perfectly able to serve crypto customers as long as they understand and can, risks and blah blah blah. So that's really interesting. That banks can now do that. I think that was Seyr once had those 3 points of like the 3 points that have to be reached. ETF, this SAP 21 or what it is called, and exactly now this also, like, we kind of have all 3 points. That was for him really important, that Bitcoin adoption is growing in America. I think this year will surprise even many Bitcoin bulls what's possible. But that's just my 2 cents. What are you thinking? What the next few years is possible for you?
Yeah, for me, I'm really focusing on self-custody, right? So because what I think is going to be interesting is that I believe still that there's a lot more Bitcoin going around on paper than there really is. And this, of course, suppresses the price still, but it also is a major risk. And the majority of people on this planet still don't know how to self-custody. They don't know that they can really take the Bitcoin into their own hands quite easily. And I think that's a major focus point where we will also see, and we also see that already, it's becoming a lot easier. And apart from that, it's like it has to be better. And with top manuscript and currently like multi-sig setups with time locks, it's becoming really, 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 really great to hold your own keys, even for larger amounts of Bitcoin in a safe manner. Even seeing like Lloyd's insured products coming on the market, so you can even insure yourself on your custody. I think there's a lot going on in that space, and that is super interesting to follow. So And that's mostly outside of Europe in general, I think, currently. But also, if you see, like, we sell a lot of signing devices, so all Bitcoin only, air gapped in general. We also do BitBox, but that's not air gapped. But in general, it's Bitcoin only and open source, because those are the main pillars you have to have to be able to trust the device. And if you then look at the devices, they are becoming easier to use, and they are also becoming a lot better, let's say, quality wise. So I think we will see major steps forward in the upcoming years in this field, and that means that it will become a lot easier for people to take self custody. And then I would expect also some sort of self custody to start happening within the Lightning Network. So if you look, for instance, at Phoenix Wallet, of course, it's you have a self-custodial Lightning solution, let's say. I'm expecting these kind of products to happen more in the future, and then the place where people come in with Bitcoin will be directly on Lightning. They will not be on chain at the start, and maybe if they dig in a lot further, then they will probably move on chain and start to do some things there. But in the basis, I would expect that within the next couple of years, most people will start to dive into Lightning only, and then will stay into Lightning for a long time before they maybe step up into doing something on chain. So these are two things that I think that are really becoming important, and going forward is also a main focus where I would like to focus on also.
That's super interesting. We know, like, not everyone will have the luxury. Bob Burnett made such an amazing, I think he was that on the podcast, who made such an amazing comparison. Like, we are blessed to drive in a Rolls Royce on the main layer. Like, that's a privilege to have. And that's kind of like, not everyone in the future will have that, because we need to have Bitcoin, the asset, as secure as possible. Like, that has to be this pristine asset that cannot be manipulated with. Maybe find some interesting solution that it opens up a little bit with not restricting the decentralization and the security aspect of it. But Lightning will become more and more mainstream, or like maybe another layer 2, I don't know, but I think Lightning probably wins the race with the layer 2 adoption. Before we go into that, I want to make one small step backwards with self-custody. Do you think self-custody itself, the concept, will become mainstream? I see so many Bitcoiners still don't have self-custody, even though they are really educated on why Bitcoin, they're really focused on Bitcoin, but they really steer away from having self-custody and the how to secure Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think they are going to move towards self-custody, because it's simply long-term much cheaper. And the products that are coming are so much better. So let's, for instance, look at Liana with a product where you have optionality in inheritance. So then actually you have, like, you hold your own Bitcoin, but let's say your wife also has a key. And then at some point, if you die, then automatically after some time, the key of your wife actually has access to that Bitcoin, which makes it super easy to have inheritance planning. And I think this is the key aspect where a lot of Bitcoiners are like, I find it difficult because, if I die, then, and I don't want to explain them now, like, this thing is, like, I think the major discussion point I've seen throughout the years with Bitcoiners. And this is something that Top Miniscript with Liana, for instance, solves. And time locking your key is in that sense insanely beautiful, because you just renew with a transaction, let's say every year, and as long as you're alive, you will be doing that. And then as soon as you die, the next one will have the keys. So it's fantastic, and it's basically an almost zero cost solution. And also, like with Taproot, it becomes relatively private. So also there, it's much better than it used to be in the past. So I think, yeah, these key problems that we see with Bitcoiners are slowly being taken away, and I'm expecting a lot on that front. Yeah.
I love that. We need more innovation on self custody as much as possible to make it as easy as possible. Because I feel like some people just have a lot of fears around it because they're not used to having actual self custody. They're like, oh, like what if I lose that device? Oh, what if I lose that seed phrase? What if I lose that? Can I recover it? And like, yeah, like, but you have to make sure you can recover it. Like, it's not that you can call somewhere. You have to make sure that you can recover it yourself. Like, that's self custody. That's like the self-sovereign way, and people are not used to that. Like, I think that's just a really new concept that we have to educate the world on. But it's a great thing.
I think the driving comparison is always really good. So if you say, can you drive a car? And most people do have a driver's license and can drive a car, and they learned how to drive a car. Come on. To be honest, it's not more difficult than learning how to drive a car. I think that's it's just like in the minds of a lot of people, it's made difficult. I think also because of like how we discuss it and how it's put forward, and there are indeed some devices that if you look at them, then you think, holy shit, this is what kind of nerdy techie thing is this? That is all going away, in my opinion, and it's going away quite rapidly. And if you look, I think there are currently in total, there are more than 10 million devices roaming the planet at the moment. And let's say that most people own multiple devices. So it's just a couple million people, most likely, that are doing some self-custody, some form of self-custody. If that grows with just, let's say, like 1% of the world population, then 8 billion people, then it's insane what we're going to see. And I'm expecting that not all to be on chain, as I said. So I also expect that to be with Lightning. So I expect some kind of self-custody with Lightning too, because people need to become sovereign or self-sovereign in some kind of way. And how that will look, I have no clue, but I think that is going to happen at some point too.
Absolutely. It's a great point of like the UI and the UX of Bitcoin interfaces is not always the best. But when you just look at the last 5 years, what happened in the space, it's amazing. Yeah. Like, and then move forward to like the next 5-10 years, it will be massive. And yeah, we need more designers, UX and UIs people in Bitcoin to make everything look also really beautiful. Because I think we have a lot of people that work really great on the backend side of things. And yeah, the UI and the UX has to be even as beautiful as the backend.
Yeah, but it's also important that we keep sovereignty alive, like, because it always comes with trade-offs. So for the more technical people, they should still be able to really have full ownership, and also full ownership over of their data. So for instance, if you run a node, you still want to be able to do everything through your own node, that you're fully sovereign. And that's, of course, for a small niche market. But this is, I think, very important, because what you, of course, see is that some of these larger, let's say, self-custodial wallets, they share data with the government. They are public about it. And yeah, this is, of course, not the most sovereign thing you could think of. And then what happens if there is some crazy tax regime coming in some country where you coincidentally live with your family and your kids are in that school and you can't really leave? Then you're really fucked. So I'm also quite skeptic about a too great UI where all your data is shared. And I think that rabbit hole will also open up for a lot of people in the future. And I think that's also very important, because you want to be able to move if you're not treated well. And it looks like some governments are in different paths, let's say. There's more freedom coming in some regions, but it looks like they're really clamping down in others. So, and if that's the case, then you want to move with your feet, right? And then you need to have full sovereign capability, not be, owned by the device you are working with. And I think that's a very important thing.
It's super important to have that. How do you look at scaling Bitcoin? Like for me, Lightning is kind of the most likely candidate for layer 2. Then there's like Fedimint and eCash and all of the others. Since there's also Liquid now that gets mentioned more and more. How do you see the current development for scaling Bitcoin above the main layer?
Yeah, so I think Lightning has proven itself already quite well. If we look at my web shop, last year, I think I published the numbers, but it was we had over 400 Lightning transactions. It was quite an amount of Bitcoin that went through our web shop. A lot of people pay with Lightning, and if you look indeed a couple of years ago when we started, it was very difficult. It was it had problems, failing payments, these kind of things. But now it has progressed so much that you keep your privacy. We are running, for instance, now also an Albi hub as a self-custodial solution, but we use Lightning Checkout as a plugin on our website, because Lightning Checkout has a very good node management, and we didn't want to constantly also watch our node ourselves. We have our own node with Lightning, but we link it to Lightning Checkout, and they have for sure the best connection, so everyone can easily pay with us. And I think managing that is still not super easy. And I think that also is going to be, let's say, more automated in the future. And when that happens, in a combination with some kind of self-custodial manner, I think that Lightning will really, really fly. So, and I think that's going to happen, but it's just a question of time.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, just with your own shop and how quickly that went, it kind of goes back to what we already said earlier. The adoption is going so fast in so many different aspects, but because we are inside of that Bitcoin and we're looking at like just a few months behind and a few months before, we don't really see how fast we actually kind of moving. I think we are already on a really steep adoption curve, but we don't really see it.
Yeah, I think it's actually insane to see how little problems we now have indeed with Lightning. Like in the beginning, that was of course totally different, and then now it's non-existent. So it went from not stable at all to super stable. Plus, just seeing hundreds of people easily pay with it and preserving their privacy with it instead of using fiat is just, it's mind-blowing for me also, because if you look at what we share and what we have to share if people use fiat, like PayPal is relatively big still in Europe, and every time a PayPal payment is being done, all the data has to go to PayPal, otherwise we don't get paid. It's just insane, like you have to share everything because they sell the data. It's just that's such a joke in that sense, and people are not really aware of how this works, right? So I would expect that when we digitize more and cash is becoming more of a problem, I think in the future, then people will want to have some private spending, and then the only proper private spending that you would have is on Lightning. So that's just not possible. And that we have that with fiat. So it's the only privacy preserving manner we have.
Absolutely. Do you foresee any challenges coming for Lightning, for adoption? Anything that you're currently looking at that kind of has to be like overcome or oversolved?
What I would find interesting is that most people would go through, like, say, banks, and then of course, again, these banks will most likely also fail. Like there will be many banks that will have problems. There will be a lot of disasters again, and that's what I would also expect to happen in the future, because most people will not go through a self-custodial way. They will go through like a third party. So the largest Lightning apps are not self-custodial. So I would expect then some failures to happen again in the future, but that's the path that we just walk on. And I do believe that it's inevitable that more and more people will use it, because it's permissionless and it's the only way that we can onboard the planet. Like, a lot of people don't have a passport. So how do you want to get into a proper financial system? And for the largest part of the planet, they are in a bad financial system. I personally think we are currently also in a bad financial system in Europe, but that's a different discussion. I think the biggest threat also to Lightning and to Bitcoin in general would be a very conservative central bank, where basically the payments are free. So if money can start to flow freely with preservation of privacy, and there's not too much inflation because it's a conservative monetary policy, all of a sudden you have a competition with Bitcoin. And that's the only competition I would see in the upcoming years. And I'm curious which central banks are going to go in that direction, because currently they all live in parallel, right? So they inflate more and more with each other, because they want their industry to perform. But yeah, if someone switches that into a hard money standard, then all of a sudden you get some competition from that central bank.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit the bitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty.
Absolutely. It's because you mentioned the EU and the European space at all. It's kind of sad to see where all the news kind of break from America. And like, even if you go on Twitter, even if you go on all those things, like even if you go to German Bitcoin spaces, a lot of the talks are even about the what's happening in America in Bitcoin, because all the things that happen in the EU are on a national level or on the EU level. It's usually not that positive to think about, with the travel rule, with Mika and stuff like that. How do you see EU actually having a disadvantage to the US currently with Bitcoin game theory? And is there any point where you're like you would leave the EU, or is there any point where like, oh, like I have a lot of hope for Europe in terms of Bitcoin, because the grassroots movement coming from up, and it doesn't really matter what politicians are doing?
Now, in the long term, of course, Bitcoin will prevail, but there can be a lot of pain in between, right? So, and I think that's what's also going to happen. So, if you look at very simple the tax bill and the rules around DAC 8, is that all the data from all the exchanges has to be shared with the tax authorities, and the European Union wants the member states to tax Bitcoin additionally, so they have 2.5 billion extra income from Bitcoin. So we all know that this is going to be in effect in 2027, and that basically means that we would see major taxes on Bitcoin, let's say. So, and if you read through the lines of the, let's say, the ECB paper that was released lately, where they said, yeah, Bitcoin could go to infinity, and it's very important that everyone has an opinion on that. This is unfair, right? Like, this is the direction that politically it's already going. You see this also in some of these weird comments online, like we are going to move into a narrative shift of, yeah, Bitcoin is something, but it's unfair. These people got very rich and it was very unfair, so we have to tax them to spread it among the people once again. And that's what I'm expecting to see in Europe in the upcoming years. And when that happens, I think a lot of people will leave. Most of the people that I'm in touch with that have quite a good Bitcoin understanding and holding, they have already left because they know that this is not going in the right direction. And the question is if this is going to be set out through the entire EU, or if there will be some countries that will stand out and do it differently, because they might see a major influx of people fleeing there because they want to of course, live with their Bitcoin and be able to save at least, for the future. So this is going to be interesting. And that's what we will see in the upcoming 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard yesterday. Wait, maybe I find it. The Czech central bank head wants to buy billions of euros in Bitcoin. I heard that yesterday on my feed everywhere, and I was not sure what it really is, so I did not look into it. Maybe
they're voting for it today. So, but that's a research to put it on the balance of the central bank in Czech Republic. But what is already interesting is that Czech Republic, of course, removed all kinds of tax on Bitcoin. So they already put a very clear stance that they are moving in a different direction than the rest of the European Union. And the interesting thing is they still have an independent central bank, right? They are not in the euro. They have their own Czech krona, which they want to protect, of course, for the future. And this central bank governor there, he has a quantum investment background. He's and he just is very plain and simple about this. Like, if this is something outside of the current system, we need to have it on the balance. And they are aiming for a 5% of their total balance to go onto Bitcoin, and they want to investigate it. So the vote today will be about, are they going to start an investigation to do this? And yeah, that's of course super interesting, because
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so more central banks are going to move in this direction, of course, because we all know that these currencies like the euro or like the dollar have major issues. Not talking about the Chinese yuan even, and there's so much debt around that Bitcoin might be a solution for a transition. And I think that's what is signaling when you read this kind of news. Yeah,
I love that. It's kind of, because maybe people outside of the EU are not as aware of that, but EU is not one country. Like, there's many different states that have many different tax laws and everything. Like, it's just like one room where everyone is within. There are some really dependencies between the states, obviously, but there are different tax rules, there are different migration rules, there are different whatever. Like there are many different rules, so there are a lot of game theories in between the nation states going on of like who gets the people, because I think Europe is a wonderful and really nice place to live. Like it's a really beautiful place to live. No matter if you're in Croatia, Austria, Netherlands, France or Spain, like they are really amazing to live. And then it's like, if you can move freely in the whole of the EU, because as an EU citizen, it's pretty easy to move around, then you go there where you're treated best. So I think that might be the hopeful straw for European citizens.
Yeah, and I think that's also the direction where it might head, right? So there will be differences between these countries, and that will help a lot for settling, let's say, for a lot of people. I think that's going to move quite rapidly, and we will see that unfold when these new tax regulations, specifically on Bitcoin, will come into place within the next. It's 2026 already. All these exchanges have to start sharing data, and then I think in 2027 we will really see what is going to happen on that part. And it's very interesting because they're always talking about, it needs to be unilateral, but this is not going to happen. Like every country is going to do it in a different way, and we even see that with MiCAR currently, right? The registrations of all these exchanges. You can register wherever you want in Europe, and of course, every country does it in a totally different way. And of course, this will have impact, and that's also something that's going to be very interesting in the upcoming year. Like in the Netherlands, the first companies have already gone through this entire process of getting a license, and the Dutch regulator is very, very, very progressive and very, very much ahead of the rest of the European Union. And then there are others where it's not even opened yet, which is like completely insane if you look that in a couple of months, like this MiCAR is in full effect and you can't deliver any services, and some countries the process didn't even start. Like that's such a weird thing already, where you see this Europe is just like it's so fragmented. And then, I'm very, very curious how this will play out, because, as I said, the country that's going in the strongest or going in the most extreme with tax measures, they will lose a lot. They will lose a lot of hardworking young people because if they move too strongly against it, they just move. They don't care.
Do you think that the EU as an institution can hold in the current form as the UK left a couple of years ago already? And the last EU election also kind of showed all the parties that are EU critical really gained a lot of voting power. Do you see that kind of the EU citizens are a little bit pissed already, annoyed at the EU, and that maybe that can lead to some break of the EU or a different form or revolution of the EU, or like something in that direction?
You can see everywhere that people are fed up with overregulation, right? And now it's coming into effect in the US, and then you see, oh shit, in the EU, we also need to do something. And it's very clear we might also get to see Euro bonds coming very soon. So that's actually money creation within the EU, where we get all of a sudden. So there's going to be a lot of strange struggles within the European Union. And I'm very curious about how this is going to play out. I sincerely hope that more and more people grasp Bitcoin timely, because I think it looks very, very bleak for let's say the euro in this case. And even if you saw in the Netherlands, like lately in the media, we've had messages from the central bank, from the bankers union, from all kinds of news outlets on the front page, like make sure you have cash at home, because the banking system might have problems. We are moving into like some kind of war phase, and they could be hacked. And I'm also often sitting with the Dutch Central Bank, and I brought some. I actually wearing them now. I brought these socks to the Dutch Central Bank, so it's Bitcoin socks, because there was on the major newspaper, the largest newspaper in the Netherlands. It said on the front page, make sure you have 50 euros in your sock. Because if the systems fail, then you need to have these 50 euros to survive. Now, I gave all these central bankers, I gave them socks with, I have that here, wait one sec, with this, because you can also have a sock with 12 or 24 words. And I gave this little speech there, like, if you really want to be safe, it's very nice that you put some paper in a sock, but to actually have 12 or 24 words in a sock is far more valuable for the long term. So you maybe should advise people to do that. And they were, of course, laughing, but I'm really serious about this. Like, if we look at war scenarios, we've already seen that played out in Europe, Ukraine, long-term scenarios of systems that will be online as a monetary system. It's only Bitcoin. It's not going to be any other system. And people forget that very often. And I think that's something that we really need to pick up. We need to make sure that people get educated about this. So we build better systems that actually can persist. And in Europe, everything is running on American software and hardware. So the entire financial system. And of course, they have a button. So I think Europe has something to do there. And an open source protocol is in that sense available quite rapidly. So interesting.
It's. Do you fear of a complete euro like the currency euro collapse when you see those kind of movements?
Eventually, every fiat currency has collapsed throughout history. So it will collapse at some point, but we don't know when. And it could be decades, hundreds, you don't know. But I am not too positive about how it's going with the euro, because if you look how everything is moving into a direction where they absolutely don't have a mandate for. We still have high inflation over here. People are losing trust very rapidly. We are like in the Netherlands now this week also, they are increasing the VAT and like not cutting government spending. No, they increase the VAT. So everyone will be in pain again. It's just like people are very, very, very angry with their governments already in Europe. And I don't see a quick solution coming. And the euro is not the answer for anyone.
It's super interesting because Austria is actually one of the worst countries in parts of inflation in the EU zone. I think we are like number 2 and number 3 in the whole of all of the 27 countries. And
I think we are number 1. Yeah.
you're number 1 and also.
Yeah, we are at 4 point something still, like 4.2% or something. I don't know. It's insane.
I try to find statistics, but because I always hear that Austria is so bad in the comparison.
It is bad. It's like Austria and the Netherlands. Yeah, it's a pain.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's super interesting because they spent so much money the last 4 or 5 years. And now actually there's a government shift and a party that never was in the government comes in and they really won the last election by far, like a really big advantage. And they want to now cut a lot of expenses. And now you already hear the complaints of people like, oh, like that bonus I don't get anymore. We had a climate bonus every year that you just get. It's basically helicopter money for everyone. Yeah. And the further down you live outside of a public transport, the more money you got.
Oh,
made no sense at all. And this will be cut. There will be like many more things that they cut, and it's a huge amount they have to save. Otherwise, to get a deficit process of the EU, where there are currently like 5 countries like I think Hungary, Romania, and like 2-3 other countries, like countries that you don't want to compare yourself within the EU in that regard. And now the government is cutting so much, and people are complaining, oh, like I got that money before. I'm like, yet that's good. Like we're getting a smaller government now. They're trying to cut government spending, and at the same time don't increase taxes. I like that. Like they are saying, we don't want to increase taxes. We will not increase taxes, but we have to balance the budget somehow. So we have to cut the government spending. So it's the first time since like 5 years I have a little hope for the government, actually, because they're like, oh, we have to cut spending, and it's really fascinating. And I hope I see that across Europe as more and more governments kind of wake up of like, we cannot raise taxes. At some point, people will just leave. Like they will abandon the country.
Yeah. And I think for young people, in that sense, like if you are not really settled, it's interesting where you want to settle yourselves. You know, like if we look at the enormous debt burden that's laid upon you within the EU, and then when Eurobonds come, it will get even worse. I find it very questionable where this is all going to go. And yeah, I think a lot of people are already moving, and more people will follow because of this. So you need a major shift, and that shift might happen, but I don't see it happen very rapidly.
Absolutely, I'm happy that my income is actually not depending on Europe, because that's another thing. Like you can live in Europe and still get income from other countries, which might make this a little bit safer. But the best case is, of course, if collapse, you're not even physically here. Really, really cool. We have one topic that we we discussed that we actually wanted to start with, but in 1 hour we needed to get here, and this is kind of open sourcing mining and the centralization risk of Bitcoin mining. What are you doing in that regard, and what's the problem there?
Yeah, so last year it was actually funny. We have the Node Runners group. It's a big group in the Netherlands that runs nodes, of course. Some of these guys were really interested in having a BitX, and I was like, BitX, small miner, a single chip miner, what the fuck are you talking about? It's like such a waste of money, because you just have a single chip, and no, but it's open source and we want it, and you can import this shit, so you start importing this. Okay, I will buy a few, and then I'll see what happens. So I bought a few, but that became a bit more than a few. It became hundreds and hundreds of them, and then when we discussed this further down the line, it was like, okay, this is actually a movement where a lot of people are going to tinker with the code. They are going to tinker with mining. They are going to have access to mining. They're going to learn about mining. They're going to join the biggest lottery on our planet, because everyone is trying to hit the block. And then if we all do that on a basically almost zero cost basis at home, because it uses only 15 watts of power, it's nothing. And you plug it in at every home, we decentralize the network quite rapidly. So then I started to really dive into this, and then also the impact it could have on the broader mining, because we install mining at businesses. So we got famous because of the greenhouse with the tulips. A lot of people have seen that picture come by at X or Noster. But we do it at businesses, and that's a bit larger scale. So of course you cannot do that at home. But we have quite some problems with these proprietary systems that are in these miners. So can you imagine that within the next couple of years, we develop it much more open? We can actually steer the chips directly, maybe even on DC. So with solar, for instance, you can make the direct coupling with the chips. So you get all the waste out. We can do direct heating on these chips much more efficiently. We can start steering them much more direct, so they can be used for load balancing on the grid, but for let's say smaller amounts of peak shaving, and in a shorter time period. That would also become super interesting. So this movement could have a much more broader impact, where a lot more people start to get interest, build on this open source movement, and then we could really decentralize the mining further out of the hands of the large corporations where it is currently. And of course, it needs to be at the locations where it makes sense. So where there's need for heat, where there's excess electricity available. But it will be a competition with these fiat loan-based companies, I think, in the long term, where we really have private mining and open mining. And as we currently see, F2Pool has implemented the OFAC compliance list, so they're not mining some transactions. This is where it's going to go. There will be some of these pools that are going to be not mining certain stuff because the government says so. And then as soon as taxes will start to come in also over this, then I think these larger ones will start to lose against the individual, let's say.
And that's super interesting, because when they kind of implement that, and at the same time, the individual and the private minings are getting more and more popular, and they are rejecting basically transactions, which then will be in the other ones more, they kind of lose out on the money. The game theory is really interesting there, how this will shake out in the future with Bitcoin mining. And I do think we need more open sourcing of mining. It kind of blew my mind. I was not aware of that at all till like November last year, like since a few months, where some of the people came on the podcast and basically said like, the mining pool centralization is a problem. The templates that they use is a problem. And then also like the hardware is kind of a problem. So Bitcoin is by far the most decentralized asset, but we can still get it further. Like we can still improve on the decentralization aspect of it. How do you see it with Ocean and with the pool centralization? Is Ocean kind of a good solution, or do we need even something more or something else?
There should be more solutions in the future, but currently there is only, Ocean, and also that's why we started up a server in the center of the Netherlands, a datum server that we are running. So we have a Bitcoin Brabant datum server where people can connect to. So if you want to mine a little bit and get some lightning out, or you want to mine with Ocean but into a local server in Europe, then I directly will say it's pool.bitcoinbrabant.com and then /7331. So that's the Stratum address where you can point it to. And this is, I think, for the moment, the best solution that we have. And I think it's important that more and more people use it also, because you actually get paid out more than with the other pools. But it's also that we need to take it into our own hands and decentralize it, because if these few pools are all being enforced to go into a certain direction, then the network is not really free anymore. So we need to take it into our own hands. And I think when we see things like what is now happening with F2Pool, it's inevitable that there will be more pools, and it will decentralize more in the future.
I love that. Yeah, we definitely have to move in that direction. I hope we can. I think we can really make that happen. Do you also think that, or do you also encourage people to start mining at home, especially if they have like some garage going on where they can put it there and not in their apartment and stuff like that?
In Europe, only if you have excess electricity, it might be interesting, and if you can use the heat. But in general, in Europe, we have the highest electricity prices on the planet. So it's extremely hard. The few locations, like this couple of dozens locations that we did, it was very simple. They had huge overcapacity of generation where they didn't get paid for. So they had to shut down their solar. Then in the winter, they had very inefficient, expensive natural gas heating. So they could use the heat in the winter. And then it makes sense with a relatively low electricity price on the business. because it needs to be a business. Because if you're a private person, it's far too expensive. So in Europe, in general, it just doesn't make any sense. So, and then of course, I think it's interesting that people learn a bit. Just of course, I'm selling these BitXs, so I always find it difficult to sell to sell something. But if you are interested in what mining is, don't start with a big machine like I did. Just buy a BitX, and then learn a bit about it, what it is, how it works. But yeah, don't dive in to go full berserk on a big machine if you are not far below 10 cents a kilowatt hour, because you will be ruined.
Absolutely, yeah. It's super interesting because the big machine is also a way bigger investment in itself. Like if you buy it new, it's massive. But even if you buy it used, it's still a big investment to start with.
Yeah, it was my pay. So in 2021, let's say the peak of the last bull market, I wanted to really learn everything about mining. So I bought a miner for 15,000 euros. It was the most expensive, most efficient miner that existed on the planet. It was an S19J Pro. At that moment, it was the best of you can get. And I started to heat my house. I got new electricity contracts, built boxes for it, and then I had a contract where the electricity was super cheap. And then on the 1st of January 2022, Russia. And then boom, my electricity price went like tenfold. So I couldn't run the machine anymore. It was just too expensive. And I had a standing contract with the natural gas, so I was not in that much pain with heating with natural gas, but electricity it was not possible anymore. And then I hung it in a greenhouse and created this little video, and that was watched 500,000 times. And that's where the company came from, like all of a sudden we got a lot of people said, oh yeah, I have a standing electricity contract with my business, still cheap electricity, but my gas price exploded. So it was exactly the opposite of what I had, these businesses had. And their return of investment at that moment was 1 year. So they would just buy the machines, we would install them, we would heat it with electricity, and they would have the payback was 1 year at that moment. So it was just so insane to do it that rapidly. And that was 2022. And that's also when the business started. So that was a nice year for us to run it. But now, when the electricity prices, of course, went up a bit, natural gas prices are also still quite high. But there are still some locations, but not that many.
So you basically hang the miners in the greenhouses and capture you reuse the heat of the miners.
Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, it's someone told me about a project, I think in Finland or somewhere, where they have apartment buildings using Bitcoin miners with solar roofs and basically making the cost of the electricity for their people in the apartment way cheaper with using the.
It's happening on a large scale, and especially in Finland, it makes sense because if you have a very, very low temperature, which they have over there, then it's your efficiency for air to water heat pumps is very low. So then the efficiency of a miner, which is 1-on-1, is just fine, and it makes sense over there. And you see it. I think almost 5% of entire Finnish housing is now almost heated with Bitcoin miners. It ramped up very rapidly. So tens of thousands of livings we know of already have Bitcoin heating in there, and that went quite rapidly because it just economically makes sense. And they have really cheap electricity in Finland. So it's moving in these up north countries. It makes sense to do it there.
Is it at some point where Bitcoin mining is involved in so many different small devices? For example, heat reuse. But if you want to heat something, like there's every small heater that is in a house will move that, or is it only possible when you have a country like Finland where it's cold and it would be otherwise very inefficient, and then it makes economic sense? Or do you see a future where Bitcoin mining is kind of integrated in more and more everyday devices like a heater?
I think it will happen at locations where it really makes sense. So where there's excess electricity, in this case, for instance, also the excess methane. So you have this drilling where methane is vented into the air. So there's excess energy at a lot of locations. And all these locations where there's excess electricity, they will be tapped with Bitcoin for sure. And then next to that, at some locations where indeed there is need for heat in combination with that, that heat will be used. But to see it in small devices for heating everywhere, like, no, I don't see that happen, because the machine becomes more complex for heating, which will incur cost. And then if you look at how fast the machines are evolving, it wouldn't be that wise to do that in such a machine, I think. So yes, so let's say, for instance, in the Netherlands, we have quite some excess solar. You now have to pay the grid if you want to deliver electricity back on the grid. Okay, you could put a small miner there, which then balances your own electricity use. So you use a bit of that electricity to mine Bitcoin. You could use the heat. That could make sense. But to have that in a specific different machine involved that has a single function, which is critical, I wouldn't see that happen. I would always see it as some kind of standalone thing, which is, of course, a heater, but in combination with smart steering, but not in any other way.
Really cool. I love that. We have one question that I ask each and every one of my guests, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
What can we learn from me besides Bitcoin? That's a good question. I think what is important going forward for us as Bitcoiners, because everyone who's watching this will be Bitcoiners, is going to be we really have to look at. Sorry, someone is coming in. Okay, this is important. That's maybe a nice thing. There's some tea all of a sudden. Take care of the people around you. I think that's the most important thing. And
that's perfect with you getting a tea from people that care about you.
yeah. So what the interesting thing is, if we all take care of our surroundings and the people, then Bitcoin automatically will grow. And that's because if we all do good, then the good comes back. And I think that's something that we are often missing. Everyone is just working their ass off and stacking as much as they can because they know it's the right thing. But if we are not also concentrated on our surroundings and doing a step-by-step good over there, which also maybe involves Bitcoin in some sort, then we will not win the battle, I believe. So yeah, I think that's Again, I come back to Bitcoin. By the way, it has to be outside of Bitcoin, but just be good. That's my my point.
That's something I actually noticed with a lot of those answers. It's like, because I asked that in every podcast, and it's fascinating. Almost nobody does not mention Bitcoin in that answer. Like, Bitcoin is usually mentioned in the answer, what's besides Bitcoin somehow, especially in the end of the answer. It always goes back to Bitcoin. It's super interesting to see, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin? And then 2 minutes later, Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But it's a good point. Like, taking care of other people. It's a really good point, and I love that you just got the tea in that moment where you talked about that. It's great.
Yeah,
really cool. We have one end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And your question from the previous guest is, how will Bitcoin impact the next generation?
Oh, that's going to be so positive. I have children myself, and I'm so happy that Bitcoin is here, because I've always been quite an optimist in general, technology-wise, but not in politics or the status of where the world was going, because money really makes the world sick. Current form of money, and knowing that my children when they are like really going to be set free in the world, so they are really on their own feet and they can do whatever they want. So that's in quite some years from now. I'm expecting that we have a lot of beacons of hope based on Bitcoin across the globe. And these regions, or these citadels, or whatever we always call them, they will grow so fast, and it will be so positive, and we will all think of how we are going to shape and build for the future in such an interesting way that I cannot imagine it yet. But it's I'm super positive for the next generations, because hard money makes sure that you're not afraid of the future anymore. And I think currently almost everyone is afraid of the future, and that's why you see such a sick world. And I'm looking forward to that point where we have more of these beacons popping up.
That's beautiful. That's lovely. Really cool. Thank you so much, Bert, for taking time, for being on. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Bitcoin.com is the website. So that's where our shop is, and you can find all the stuff that you see behind me. And then we have Bitcoin Brabant on X. We have Bitcoin Brabant on Noster. So yeah, you can follow us there. And even on LinkedIn, actually, and Instagram also. Yeah. That's
really cool.
Practice.
Thank you so much for taking the time. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.